My next guest is Alexandra Huynh, the 2021 National Youth Poet Laureate. She is a first-year student at Stanford University at Cardinal and employs poetry as a tool of self-reclamation and social justice. Alexandra, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Bob. Thank you so much for having me.
It's the first time I've ever talked to a poet laureate. I've interviewed a lot of people, so I'm looking forward to this. And I watched you on YouTube with your poetry. Let's start off with how you got started in poetry. At what age did you start to get interested in this?
Well, I think the first time that I ever wrote a poem was when I was 7 years old, and that was when I wrote a song. And at the time, I was taking singing lessons, and what I realized was that I was getting frustrated because I felt like I was singing these songs that weren't written for me. They didn't reflect what was important to me. And so I decided to take that into my own hands. And I kept writing songs all throughout middle school and high school. But when I was 16 years old, that was when I joined my first ever poetry slam. And after walking out of that room for the very first time, I realized that my life had sort of changed because there were people and there were spaces where I could share my story authentically. And that empowered me in a way that no other activity did, because I felt like I could enact change simply by being my authentic self. And I haven't stopped writing ever since.
Describe the creative process. How do you get your ideas? I mean, you have a lot of themes of social injustice, but you know, do you start with a notepad? Everybody has a kind of a different process, whether they're writing creatively or writing for journalism. How do you get your ideas? Where does the creativity come from day to day?
Well, that's a great question. And I would say that it varies based on the poem. Sometimes when I've had a very emotional experience and I feel like I need to just dump it out on a paper, then I'll write a poem in, say, 30 minutes, and I won't edit it much after that. But there are poems that I feel like it's taken me my entire life to find the words for. And I try not to rush myself in writing those poems, because I realize that the majority of the work that goes into poetry is living, because otherwise there wouldn't be anything to write about. But more broadly, I would say that I use poetry as a way to uplift stories that are meaningful to me and to make connections from my personal world to the broader world in an attempt to kind of shed light on issues that perhaps aren't talked about as often.
Do you think that poetry can affect real change? Because that's what your poems have been about, and that's why you've been you're a poet laureate, is because of these big climate change themes. Do you think that's a way to move people to change policy, not only in the United States but globally?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's easy to tell someone why they should take a particular stance on any issue, but what really makes an impact is building that empathy through storytelling. I think through poetry, we're able to take people through the thought process and the lived experiences that have made people fight for what they care about. And I think that is how we kind of create a sort of common humanity across people who don't necessarily share the same experiences. And beyond that, I think that poetry is the rhythm of humanity. I think everything that we do has a sort of poetry to it, and to be able to really draw that out of people and to share their stories, but also inspire them to share their own stories, I think that's when we open up a dialogue to really consider each other as individuals and not as opponents. And that's why I think that poetry is so powerful.
Well, first of all, tell us. This is going to be my first question. You know, what's your first year like at Stanford? How do you balance your love of poetry and studies?
That's a great question, and I think I'm still figuring that out. Every college freshman will describe college as a whirlwind, and I've definitely experienced that. But every day I just feel so grateful to be in a place where I'm constantly surrounded by interesting people. I can walk 5 minutes out of my dorm and guarantee you that I'll meet 1, 2, maybe 5 people that I'm more than happy to stop for a conversation with. And to be surrounded by so many diverse perspectives, I do feel like I will have the opportunity to become the person that will enact change that I want to see in my communities. But in terms of balancing that with poetry, I think it just takes a lot of prioritizing, and sometimes I do have to drop things either for school or for poetry, but knowing that no one actually knows what they're doing is very comforting to me, because as long as I'm trying my best at the end of the day and bringing light to every space and moving intentionally, that's all that I can really ask for myself.
And last question, what do you think, what are you worried about the future? Are you optimistic about the future? Because obviously climate change is part of our lives and has been, and it's not getting better, as you know. What do you think going forward that, can we solve this big problem?
I think that we've done a lot of damage to the planet, but we are increasingly becoming aware of our impact. And I have full faith in the next generation, in this generation, to be able to take what we know now and create solutions that will be equitable for everyone. And so while we do have a lot of work ahead of us, I do feel like we will be able to create a planet where everyone is able to thrive. But again, that's going to take a lot of work on our behalf, and constantly remembering that we have to fight for our communities, otherwise no one else will.
Well, Alexandra, thanks for joining us so much, and I look forward to watching your career. I'm sure it'll be very interesting, and I'll be watching your poems. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.